Once upon a time, there was a cheerful little girl named Little Red Riding Hood. She had a vibrant red cloak, a gift from her beloved grandmother, and it had always been her favorite. Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother shared a special bond, as they lived close to each other in a quaint little village surrounded by a magnificent forest. Every day was an adventure as she visited her grandmother, bringing joy and cheer. One sunny morning, Little Red Riding Hood packed a basket full of delicious treats. Her grandmother wasn't feeling well, and nothing lifted a spirit like Little Red's thoughtful goodies. She waved goodbye to her mother and skipped down the forest path, humming a tune. The forest was filled with wondrous sights and sounds. Birds sang harmoniously, and the tall trees danced gracefully with the winds. But, bending to smell a patch of vibrant wildflowers, Little Red Riding Hood's journey took an unexpected turn. Creeping slowly from behind a towering tree, a sly wolf appeared. He tilted his head, giving Little Red a cunning smile. "Hello, little girl. What treasures do you carry in your pretty basket?" he asked, his eyes glinting with mischief. Feeling cautious yet polite, Little Red Riding Hood smiled back. "These are treats for my dear grandmother. She's feeling unwell, you see. I'm off to visit her cottage on the other side of the woods." The wolf grinned wider, concealing his intentions. "Oh, how delightful. But why not take the path of daisies? It's far quicker," he suggested slyly. Little Red Riding Hood paused, for the daisy path was indeed more vibrant, but aloofly less traveled. Suspecting a trick, she remembered her mother's advice about forest strangers. "Thank you, but I love the usual path. It's much safer," she chirped back, continuing along her way. Little Red's thoughtful decision allowed her to reach her grandmother's cozy cottage safely without a shadow of trouble. Her grandmother greeted her with a warm embrace, grateful and proud of Little Red Riding Hood's safety and judgment. Unsurprisingly, the wolf, expecting an easy trick, found himself at a loss, wandering the forest path behind Little Red Riding Hood with a grumbling stomach and a foiled scheme. And so, Little Red Riding Hood's clever choices saved her day, and she understood the importance of staying true to her instincts and kindness. They enjoyed the treats together, and her grandmother felt better already, their laughter echoing happily into the forest trees. Once upon a time, in an enchanting forest filled with tall trees and chirping birds, there lived a clever wolf. He was not just any ordinary wolf. He had mastered the art of conversation and charm, with a pair of twinkling eyes that seemed to hold secrets untold. One sunny morning, as he strolled through his beloved woods, he crossed paths with a little girl wearing a bright red cloak. Her name was Little Red Riding Hood. "Good day, little one," the wolf said with a voice smooth like honey. "And where might you be headed on such a splendid morning?" Little Red Riding Hood, always polite and never suspicious of the friendly creatures in her magical world, happily replied, "I'm going to visit my grandmother, who lives in a cottage on the other side of the forest." The wolf's ears perked up, and an idea sprung like a flash of light in his clever mind. "Ah, what a delightful plan you have. I was thinking it's a perfect day for a walk. How about I accompany you on your journey? A chatty companion always makes the walk shorter." Red Riding Hood, seeing no harm in a talking wolf, thought it would be fun to have some company. "All right, Mr. Wolf. That sounds like a good idea. It will be much merrier walking with a friend." As they walked together, the wolf, ever so crafty, gathered information about Red Riding Hood's grandmother and her quaint little cottage. As they reached the crossroads, the wolf suggested, "I have heard the flowers are blooming splendidly today. Why don't you pick a bouquet for your grandmother? It would surely bring a smile to her face." Little Red Riding Hood was delighted by the idea. "Oh, what a splendid thought. She loves flowers. Thank you, Mr. Wolf." While Little Red Riding Hood busied herself with picking the prettiest flowers she could find, the wolf, with his clever plan fully formed, slinked away down the fastest path to grandmother's house, his mind racing with schemes. But unknown to him, this was not any ordinary story, and twists awaited him just as much as they did for Little Red Riding Hood. For in this tale, every step can be an adventure. And so, with the sun shining and flowers abloom, the day promised surprises for both Little Red Riding Hood and the clever, chatty wolf who could not resist a little adventure of his own. Once upon a time, in a lush green forest, there lived a kind-hearted little girl named Little Red Riding Hood. Everybody called her that because of the bright red hooded cloak her grandmother had lovingly stitched for her. One sunny afternoon, Little Red Riding Hood decided to visit her grandmother, who lived on the other side of the forest. Remember, don't talk to strangers, her mother advised. As she set off with a basket full of goodies, she sang softly, completely unaware that the cunning wolf was observing her from behind a tree. The wolf, with his keen eyes, devised a plan to have not just the goodies, but Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother for lunch. The sly creature dashed through the trees, taking shortcuts only he knew, and arrived at grandmother's house before Red did. The wolf knocked on the door, mimicking Little Red Riding Hood's voice. "Grandmother, it's me, Little Red Riding Hood. I've brought you some treats." Trusting the voice, grandmother opened the door and was immediately gobbled up by the wolf. Not wasting any time, the wolf dressed in grandmother's clothes, put on her nightcap, and curled up in the bed, stretching his mouth wide in a terrible imitation of a smile. Soon enough, Little Red Riding Hood arrived, humming her tune and excited to see her beloved grandmother. Knocking on the door and hearing no answer, she pushed it open. In the dim light of the room, she saw her grandmother, tucked up in bed. But something was odd. Her grandmother looked different. "Oh, grandmother," said Little Red Riding Hood with a hint of skepticism, "what big eyes you have." "All the better to see you with, my dear," replied the wolf. "And grandmother, what big ears you have." "All the better to hear you with, my dear," said the wolf, feeling pleased with himself. "Grandmother, what big teeth you have." "All the better to eat you with," roared the wolf, springing out of the bed. But clever Little Red Riding Hood wasn't so easily caught. She was prepared for his trickery. Quickly, she darted out of the door and ran as fast as her little legs could carry her, screaming for help. Nearby, the woodsman heard her cries and rushed back to grandmother's house with his sturdy axe. As the wolf lunged to catch the little girl, the woodsman burst through the door. With one swift motion, the wolf's plans were thwarted. Once upon a time, in a cozy little cottage by the edge of the woods lived a young girl named Little Red Riding Hood. One sunny morning, her mother asked her to take a basket of goodies to her grandmother, who lived on the other side of the forest. "Stay on the path and don't talk to strangers," her mother warned. Little Red Riding Hood set off, merrily skipping along the path. As she wandered through the forest, she met a sly, cunning wolf. With a charming smile, the wolf asked, "Where are you going, little girl?" Remembering her mother's advice yet feeling quite friendly, she replied, "I'm on my way to visit my grandmother, who isn't feeling well." The wolf concocted a sneaky plan and said, "Why don't you pick some pretty flowers for her?" Little Red Riding Hood thought it was a splendid idea, and she strayed off the path to gather colorful blooms. Meanwhile, the wolf rushed to grandmother's house, arriving long before Little Red Riding Hood. He knocked on the door and, pretending to be Little Red Riding Hood, tricked grandmother into letting him in. He tied her up and tucked her into the closet, then dressed in her nightgown, cap, and glasses, hopping into her bed. Soon after, Little Red Riding Hood arrived and knocked softly on the door. "Come in, my dear," the wolf said in a croaky voice. She entered the room, bringing her basket of goodies. As she got closer, she noticed her grandmother looked odd. "Grandmother, what big eyes you have!" Little Red Riding Hood exclaimed. "All the better to see you with, my dear," the wolf replied with a grin. "And what big ears you have!" "All the better to hear you with," said the wolf with a twitch of his ears. "Oh, and what a big mouth you have! All the better to eat you with," the wolf roared as he jumped out of bed to gobble her up. Quick as a flash, Little Red Riding Hood opened her basket, pulled out a packet of hot peppers that her mother had packed just in case, and tossed them right into the wolf's open mouth. The wolf howled in pain, steam pouring from his ears as he raced outside into the forest. Little Red Riding Hood quickly untied her grandmother and gave her a big hug. They laughed and promised to always be careful of strangers in the woods. They enjoyed the goodies together and celebrated the cleverness of Little Red Riding Hood. From that day on, the wolf never dared to bother Little Red Riding Hood or her grandmother again. Once upon a time, in a small village surrounded by lush forests, there lived a charming girl known to everyone as Little Red Riding Hood. She earned her name from the bright red cloak her grandmother had sewn for her, which she wore everywhere she went. One sunny morning, Little Red Riding Hood set off to visit her beloved grandmother, who lived on the other side of the forest, carrying a basket full of goodies. Before she left, her mother warned her, "Remember, stay on the path and don't talk to strangers." Cheerfully, Little Red Riding Hood nodded, skipping merrily into the woods. As she made her way through the forest, she marveled at the blooming flowers and the songbirds filling the air with melody. But lurking in the shadows was a sly and hungry wolf. The wolf, overhearing Little Red Riding Hood's plans, devised a devious plot. "Hello, little girl. Where are you going on such a lovely day?" he asked in a sugary tone. Remembering her mother's advice, Little Red Riding Hood hesitated but replied, "To my grandmother's house on the other side of the woods." The wolf, nodding intelligently, suggested, "Why not pick some flowers for her?" Delighted by the idea, Little Red Riding Hood strayed from the path, unaware of the wolf's true intentions. The wolf took this opportunity to hurry ahead to the grandmother's house. Once there, the wolf gobbled up the grandmother and donned her clothes, lying in wait for Little Red Riding Hood. Not long after, Little Red Riding Hood knocked on the cottage door and stepped inside. To her shock and horror, she realized too late that it was the wolf pretending to be her grandmother. With a loud scream, she cried for help. Luckily, a brave hunter who was passing by heard her cries and rushed to the rescue. Bursting into the house, the hunter spotted the wolf and quickly put an end to its mischief. Using his keen senses, he cleverly took the grandmother out of the wolf's belly, who, miraculously unharmed, embraced Little Red Riding Hood. Grateful and relieved, Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother thanked the hunter profusely. They promised never to forget his bravery and kindness. From that day on, Little Red Riding Hood always stayed on the path and remembered her mother's wisdom, cherishing her visits to Grandma's cozy cottage, safe and sound.